Roy Cohn. Maybe not a household name, right? But stick with us, because this guy's story, it's a wild ride through power, betrayal, all that juicy dark side of American politics stuff.
Yeah, you can't really talk about 20th century American politics without bumping into Cohn somewhere along the way.
So to get into it, we're diving into the film, Citizen Cohn. We've got some biographical info mixed in there too, and a handful of user reviews just to see how this whole, well, controversial figure lands with people.
Multiple perspectives are good, especially with Cohn. He was a lot of things. This ruthless lawyer, political power broker, even McCarthy's right-hand man during the Red Scare. And for those who need a little refresher, we're talking the 1950s when Senator Joseph McCarthy was on that fervent campaign against communists in the U.S.
Right, like McCarthyism, that whole era.
Exactly. And
Uh,
even with all the scandals swirling around him constantly, Cohn, he stayed a major player in American politics for decades.
That's just kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And the contradictions just jump out right away. Here's Cohn, a closeted gay man himself, actively going after people suspected of being communists or, well, subversives, during a time when being gay could get you labeled a threat to national security.
Talk about a disconnect. Condemning the thing you are privately, so publicly. It's kind of the definition of a complex character. What do you think drove that?
It's the million-dollar question with Cohn, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the film digs into that, especially in how they show his childhood. You see the influence of his mother, played by Lee Grant, and this really strained relationship with his dad, who was a judge.
So you've got the demanding mother, the distant judge father, and young Roy Cohn already figuring out how to work within these systems of power. Feels like a recipe for, well, some ambition, maybe some daddy issues, right?
Right. And to really see how that ambition played out, you got to look at his early career, especially the McCarthy hearings.
Mhm.
The IMDb plot summary doesn't hold back, straight up calls him ruthless, a power broker. They even show him on his deathbed, haunted by people from his past.
Whoa. Okay, that's an image. Deathbed, ghosts, yikes. Makes you think about the consequences of a life like that.
It does. And that ruthlessness, it's how he climbed to power.
Yeah.
There's this user review that really nails it. They said Cohn's legal strategy wasn't about being good in court, it was about knowing where the bodies are buried. I think that sums it up perfectly.
Less objection, more like, I've got the dirt.
Exactly. He built this persona of being the ultimate insider. If you had the money, he could fix anything. Which brings us to that chilling line from the movie. Just tell me the name of the judge.
So justice wasn't really the point for him. He was about having leverage.
Exactly. Power, and often he used it ruthlessly.
So he was the guy to call, the fixer. But his methods, let's just say they were a little morally flexible.
That's one way to put it. This willingness to operate in the shadows, use whatever it took, it made him both feared and essential. If you needed something done, Cohn was the one to call. And it's here, in these shadows of power, that Cohn's story gets really interesting.
And this is where it gets really interesting and kind of messed up, right? You got this guy, a closeted gay man, and he's part of the machine persecuting others like him. He's Jewish, but targets Jews who don't agree with him politically.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is, well, it's a lot to unpack.
It really is. So how do you explain that? Was it just survival? Like back then with the Red Scare and everything, you had to pick a side, right? Or was there something more to it?
It's a question that still fascinates people who study Cohn. Some say it was survival, blending in so he wouldn't become a target himself. Others think it was calculated, a way to gain power, stay under the radar by siding with the people in control. But the film, it seems to suggest it's more complicated than that.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, a lot of the user reviews, they talk about Cohn being alone in the end. There's this one that says he died unloved and unmourned, except, of course, by the people who, benefited from his influence and, let's be honest, his ruthlessness.
So all that power, all those connections, and he still ends up alone. That's kind of tragic in a way.
It is, and it adds this whole other layer to his story. The film even compares him to Rock Hudson.
Both closeted, both died from AIDS-related complications. But how are their stories connected beyond that?
The film suggests that while they both lived with this immense pressure, the secret, Cohn's downfall was, well, maybe even worse.
Worse how?
Well, think about it. Rock Hudson, even with the stigma, the secrecy around AIDS at the time, he had some support at the end, people who cared. But Cohn, he died pretty much estranged from everyone.
The people he used to build his empire, the ones who benefited from his, let's call it, willingness to get his hands dirty, they all disappeared when he needed them most.
Exactly. And that isolation, that lack of real connection, it says a lot about what that kind of life, built on fear and manipulation, what it really costs. The film, it's more than just a biopic. It's a cautionary tale about power, ambition, what it can do to a person.
From ruthless lawyer to, well, dying alone. Quite the arc. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Hmm.
Citizen Koo, the film itself, it started a lot of conversations.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
has. And that's what makes it so interesting. It doesn't give you easy answers, doesn't judge. It makes you confront the complexities of who Cohn was, makes you think about power, how seductive it can be, makes you question if the ends ever justify the means.
So we're left with a cautionary tale. But Citizen Koo isn't just some history lesson, right? It feels relevant even now.
Totally. The film makes you think about ambition, morality, the lines we're willing to cross to get what we want. It makes you ask yourself, would you pay the price Cohn paid? A whole life, and in the end, no real human connection.
Makes you think. One review even called it Shakespearean, like comparing Koo to Macbeth, that rise and fall, ambition leading to destruction.
Powerful comparison, both driven by that hunger for power, both finding out that reaching the top, especially when you bulldoze your way to get there, it can be kind of empty.
So no easy answers. But lots to think about.
Mm.
What would you say is the biggest question Citizen Koo asks, something relevant to us now?
Ooh, good one. Maybe it's about the compromises we make. What are we willing to sacrifice for success? Cohn's story, it's like this stark reminder. Going for power. There are consequences. And maybe a life well lived isn't about the awards or recognition, but the connections you make on the way.
It really makes you think about the legacy you're building, not just the big picture stuff, but every day, the choices we make, how we treat people. If you could ask Roy Cohn one question now, knowing how it all ended for him, what would it be?
Knowing how alone he was at the end, the missed chances to really connect with people, I'd ask, was it worth it?
Wow. Simple question, but it hits hard, right? Ambition versus connection. It seems like Roy Cohn's story, even with all the messiness, the unsettling parts, it gives us a way to look at our own lives, our values. What do we want to leave behind?
I think so. And maybe by wrestling with those questions, we can find a way to have both achievement and integrity, ambition, but with compassion.
This deep dive into Roy Cohn, it's been a journey. We've walked through the shadows of power, faced some uncomfortable stuff, but we come out of it with a better understanding of, well, what it means to be human, all the contradictions, the potential for both good and bad.
And as always, the exploration continues, right? What stuck with you about Cohn's story? Any lessons you took away? Let us know. We always love hearing your thoughts.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep.